Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Uh, it's always a joy, of course, to be with you. And it's an honor to be asked to sort of lead things off in a way, to be one of the branching streams that's flowing on in the darkness. And I'm kind of taking in who I can see. Catherine always gets the prize for the best shawl, and the best wrap. Look at that. And Cassie's in her mobile Zendo, and Judy is somewhere, maybe in the. I know where that park is in Sheffield. That's beautiful to see. Is the sound coming through okay? You hear all right? Great. Okay, we'll just launch in. The beautiful phrase that Josh and Trudy um, used as an entry point for this retreat. The branching streams flow on in the darkness, of course, comes from those early lines of the Sandokai by Sekito Kisen, the spiritual source, shines clear in the light, the branching streams flow on in the darkness. And I would imagine that most of you have taken a look at or read the Sandokai, or maybe you chanted it already today. Have you done that in the group? No? Yes? Anyway, you may be familiar with the text. If not, we'll be going over it. This is historically it's an important document in the Zen tradition. It's part of liturgy in most temples and monasteries in the Soto Zen, and it points to something that's at the center of our practice, which is understanding the relationship between the relative and the absolute in a way. And some of you may have heard this before. Someone asked Suzuki Roshi one time um, in a non-teaching um, environment. They asked him, he said, "What is Zen?" And his reply was, "Zen is when any religion goes beyond itself, including Zen." And so he's pointing to this interesting stepping beyond, which the Sandokai also helps us with and points us to and teaches us about. Some of you may know that um, my teaching partner, Peg Syverson, has been working on a book, a document of the history of Appamada and some of the ways in which our teachings have developed over the years. And in the preface to the book, which is just nearing completion, um, right now the title is Not To. I was struck by these words, which I just saw yesterday because she just sent me a copy. From the preface, it begins like this: before words, before perception, there's the unborn, undifferentiated, unsaid, unknown. It's before sense organs experience a sight, a sound, a taste, or touch, or smell. We can't know it with conceptual mind. By analysis or reflection or theory or projection, we can't find it. Yet we are never apart from it. It's an embodied enigma. And she goes on to say, sometimes I come to the edge and I think, I have nothing more to say, nothing more to think or know. It's a place without the acquisitiveness of curiosity, the longing of desire, without goals or tasks or projects. And then she says something that really touched me. She said, that place scares me less than it used to. It's a kind of openness without any tension or self-making. And it is unafraid of emptiness. And I wanted to quote that because it brings us to um, what we're studying, the Sandokai, something that touches on what's before words and perception, something that can't be necessarily caught by the conceptual mind, but that um, can be, we can enter this embodied enigma. It's an embodiment, it's an enactment. And sometimes we get to a place where we have to step beyond what we know. And this is, I think, what Suzuki Roshi was talking about. How we go beyond the questions that religion usually tries to answer. Some of you know Stephen Batchelor calls Buddhism the practice of deep, deep agnosticism, of taking the question, the position of I don't know, and continuing to deepen. So these are somewhat conceptual, and a little frame maybe around the Sandokai. But what I'd like to do is get closer to embodied enactment. And so I want to tell you a story. And this is a story from, um, well, imagine that I'm setting out a proposal for a little movie or something. You know, this is the shorthand version. The day is April 8th, 1999, and Yaizu, Japan, Shizuoka Prefecture. And on that day, a young Zen student moves carefully through a light rain, bent gently against the mist and the low-hanging branches of two glistening Japanese maples, improbably displaying leaves of completely different colors, one jade green and the other a deep carnelian red. It's hard for this student to believe he's actually here, living and practicing in the 500-year-old temple of the revered and departed elder teacher, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. The student is here because he has followed two of his living teachers, Sojin Mel Weitzman and Zenke Blanche Hartman, followed them to Japan for a practice period being held at Rinzuen, this temple. He steps from one whetstone to the next along the path leading to the tea house and small cottage, and this requires focus and concentration, and the stones are quite slippery from the decaying leaves and overgrowing moss strewn across the path, not unlike paths that you're accustomed to walking on. He can hear the water rushing over the rocks and the stream flowing deep in the gorge to his left. And that sound increases in volume at the same time as the sounds of the monks cleaning and working in the Buddha hall fade behind him. And there's an envelope tucked under his arm, which he carries to retrieve a manuscript, waiting in the small residence attached to the tea house. Sojin Mel Weitzman has been working to edit a series of talks that Suzuki Roshi gave at Tassajara Zen Mountain Monastery in the summer of 1970. The lectures were on the Sandokai, a poem by the 8th century Zen master Sekito Kisen. And these lectures are an eloquent and creative example of a first generation Japanese Zen teacher in his prime, elucidating a venerated, ancient, and somewhat difficult text to his Western students. The poem addresses the question of how the oneness of things and the multiplicity of things coexist. Or as Suzuki Roshi expressed it, things as it is. Included with the lectures are a few of the students' questions and the Roshi's direct answers, along with some meditation instruction. Sojin was one of those students in the room listening to these lectures at Tassajara. And now, at this moment, in 1999, nearly 30 years later, he is hoping to shape Suzuki's language into a form that's both accessible to students today and still faithful to the teachings of the Roshi, his teacher. The student finally arrives, stepping onto the large, flat stones set beautifully to indicate the entrance to the tea house. He steps up to the smooth wooden platform protected by the sloping roof overhanging the entryway as the rain drips from the eaves, and there he takes off his shoes. He remembers that one enters a tea house by facing backward, folding one's body just enough to slip through the very small, low doorway. The architecture invites an enactment. You're entering a different world. You don't go in head first, standing in all of your self-possessed power. You humbly turn, and with what might appear to be a bow, take a backward step across the threshold, emerging into the enchanted space with humility and wonder. As the young man does so, he discovers the manuscript waiting for me and enacts something very modern and ordinary. He slips the manuscript into the waterproof Federal Express envelope, securing the seal, and retraces his steps to the temple driveway where he waits for the truck to make its way up the winding road from the village below. Once safely delivered by hand, he can return and rejoin the other monks working around the temple. Branching streams were literally flowing in the morning darkness. The spiritual source shone clearly in the emerging morning light as the rain let up. The ancient teachings were then moving through a complex modern system of transport and delivery and would eventually arrive at the publisher in the United States, half a world away. And now, today, 25 years later, many of you, I hope, will be holding a book in your hands which contains those teachings, once given in broken English, now shaped to fit the contemporary American ear, maybe even the British. And like our brothers and sisters of the past, we long to follow the way, the authentic practice path of our ancestors. The Sandakai ends with this message: if you don't understand the way right before you, how will you know the path as you walk? Practice is not a matter of far or near, but if you're confused, mountains and rivers block your way. I respectfully urge you to study the mystery. Do not pass your days and nights in vain. Of course, you can imagine that the young student was me, just over 25 years ago, striving to understand the way. I was doing so by returning to the ancient source of Soto Zen in Japan, even though the way had been right before me all along. I didn't understand that it was not a matter of far or near, America or Japan, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't confused or missing something. And as I studied and practiced, I discovered all the ways that the so-called mountains and rivers were blocking my way. mostly within myself, by my own attachments and delusions. Studying the mystery does not yield final answers. It deepens our questions. And so today, here I am with you, once again, a long way away, but respectfully doing my best to follow the way and to encourage you to do so with me. Together, we study the mystery. I hope I have not passed my days and nights in vain, and even more deeply, that I have not passed your days and nights in vain either. So I usually don't just read things like I did, but this came from my memories and journals from that time, and I thought it was a very interesting time. If you have the book, you don't need to look in it, but if you many of you have the book, I'm sure, Branching Streams Flow in the Darkness, and in the foreword by Sojan Mel Weissman, he actually has the date, April 9th, 1999. That was the day he handed off the manuscript to me, and we sent it to the final for the publisher. And even just that enactment of going and coming back, it's just an ordinary story in some ways, but it actually reflects what the Sandokai is about. And by the way, there are three characters, San, Do, Kai. San means difference or many or diversity. And it's used as a synonym for Ji, or the concrete, phenomenal aspect of our lives, all this, everything. Do, Sando, means one or sameness or equality or commonality, unity. And it's a synonym for Ri, or the absolute, or the ultimate reality of emptiness beyond discrimination. So San, Do, and Ji and Ri, sometimes you'll see in some of the academic things you might read. And Kai, San, Do, Kai, means sometimes a promise or an agreement. In ancient uh, times, merchants would write out a contract or a tally on a piece of wood, um, and then break it in half, and could later confirm agreement by putting the two halves together. It would show that like we got the whole thing. So it's the absolute and relative, like are two halves of one thing. Sandokai. And Sakito Kisen is the Japanese name for Shitu Zikwan. This is a Chinese name. Um, because he was Chinese, this was written in the 8th century. Sakito Kisen lived from 700 to 790 AD, apparently. Do you do you happen to have the text of the Sandokai there with you? Does everyone have that? And is there someone who, once again, like the preceding chant, that's in charge of the chanting? Is there a kokyo or somebody who's doing that? Um, yeah, Jody, I think I saw, is that you holding your hand up? Yep. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mute myself for a second because Zoom is so weird. But I'm going to listen to you because I'd like to hear all of you, and let's just let's just chant the whole thing together, okay? Is that clear, Jody? Okay.
The Sandokai, the harmony of difference and equality. The mind of the great sage of India is infinitely transmitted from west to east, while the human faculties are sharp or dull. The way has no northern or southern ancestors. The spiritual source shines clear in the light. The branching streams flow on in the dark. Grasping at things is surely delusion. According with sameness is still not enlightenment. All the objects of the senses interact and yet do not. Interacting brings involvement, otherwise each keeps its place. Sights vary in quality and form, sounds differ as pleasing or harsh. Refined and common speech come together in the dark. Clear and murky phrases are distinguished in the light. The four elements return to their natures, just as a child turns to its mother. Fire heats, wind moves, water wets, earth is solid. Eye and sight, ear and sound, nose and smell, tongue and taste. Thus for each and everything, depending on these roots, the leaves spread forth. Trunk and branches share the essence. Revered and common, each has its speech. In the light there is darkness, but don't take it as darkness. In the dark there is light, but don't see it as light. Light and dark oppose one another, like the front and back foot in walking. Each of the myriad things has its merit, expressed according to function and place. Phenomena exist, box and lid joining, principle of chords like arrow points meeting, hearing the words, understanding the meaning. Don't set up standards of your own. If you don't understand the way right before you, how will you know the path as you walk? Practice is not a matter of far or near, but if you are confused, mountains and rivers block your way. I respectfully urge you to study the mystery. Don't pass your days and nights in vain.
Thank you. It's good to read it aloud together because it begins to flow in your body just a little bit. I'm going to make some comments as we go through it, but not as a way of attempting to um, you know, explain everything or try to understand it, because your venerable teachers there will be reflecting on it deeply throughout the retreat, and all of you will be doing the same, I think. It begins the mind of the great sage of India is intimately transmitted from west to east. In other words, the mind of the Buddha is already right here. It's a living reality, affirmed between real people like you and me and all of you together, face to face. The mind of the great sage, the mind of Buddha is intimate, and it's transmitted from the UK to the United States, to Japan, to everywhere. When I read this in the beginning, I thought, oh, it means it's everywhere, of course. But then if you look at the way it's translated, it says it's intimately translated from west to east. Like it goes between. It isn't just everywhere. It's moving, it's alive, it's moving. And the next couple, it says, while human faculties are sharp or dull, the way has nor northern or southern ancestors. There's a little reference there to old conflicts between different parts of China, the southern schools and northern school. And they're saying the Dharma is just the Dharma. It doesn't have different things. We live in environments now politically where there's all these divisions like, oh, the Dharma is the same for everyone. And then the good news, when human faculties are sharp or dull, you don't have to be clever. It doesn't matter, because the way is equally offered to everyone, because it doesn't really require um, a kind of an intellectual sorting out. But the effort, the struggle, all the things we go through in our lives, the Buddha way isn't dependent on our ability to like work it out effectively. And the Buddha way isn't limited by any of our struggles or our difficulties. The Buddha way is always complete and always present. And then some of our key sentences: the spiritual source shines clear in the light. The branching streams flow on in the dark. We often think of enlightenment, use that word about light. We can turn on the light and see more clearly. In this case, light is the relative, and the dark is the absolute. It doesn't mean you're like in darkness. It means, when you're at night and it's really dark and there's no moon or any light around you, you can't distinguish anything. There's no separation, in other words. Everything is one thing. But when the light comes up, then you can see distinctions. So the spiritual source is shining in the light. You can see distinctions of things. That's the relative world. Branching streams flow on in the dark is the absolute. And then, of course, the sort of warning, grasping at things is delusion. If we keep on striving, and we're in that kind of striving mode, we don't receive anything because we're always thinking it's not here. According with sameness is still not enlightenment. Suppose you have a feeling of oneness and you think, I've got it. He's saying that's not actually enlightenment. We can say that things are real and you get caught in that, or we can say, oh no, they're not really real. They're all empty. Both are illusions. And in the next section, he says all the objects and by the way, I thought I had the exact translation you have. Some of my words might be a little different. All of the objects of the senses interact and yet do not. Interacting brings involvement. Otherwise, each keeps its place. Sights vary in quality and form. Sounds differ in pleasant or harsh quality. Refined and common speech come together in the dark. Clear and murky phrases are distinguished in the light. The four elements return to their natures, just like a child turns to its mother. As much can be said about all that. I don't need to go into all the details. Refined and common speech come together in the dark. Remember, in the dark, everything is the same. There's unity. Clear and murky phrases, all these distinctions, do show up in the light. And the four gross elements, this is speaking to some old Chinese way of understanding things, are always themselves. And it's a natural way, just like it's so natural for a child to turn to its mother. And remember, there is no child without a mother, and no mother without a child. Emptiness and relativity are like, they require each other, like a mother and a child. One doesn't exist without the other. And then he mentions these elements: fire heats, wind moves, water wets, earth is solid, eye and sight, ear and sounds, nose and smell, tongue and taste. These are what these different organs of perception and different things do. And then he says, thus, with each and everything, depending on these roots, in other words, these are the ways that we relate to the world, the leaves spread forth, life comes into being. We create the world. Through the interactions of the myriad things, we arrive at the present situation. But ultimately, on the ultimate side, there's no oneness, there's no thing to be blamed for all that. From the absolute perspective, it's just leaves spreading, just contingent activity, unfolding, unfolding, unfolding. He continues, trunk and branches share the essence. Revered in common, each has its speech. And the light there's darkness, but don't take it as darkness. And the dark there's light, but don't see it as light. This is sort of like in the midst of all of your activity, there's a stillness. And in the midst of every bit of stillness that you sit, there's aliveness. In the midst of silence, there's sound. And in every sound, there's spaces of silence. It says, but don't get caught in one or the other. It's another way of just saying, don't get caught in one side or the other side. By wholly and directly, or maybe, experiencing the moment that we're actually in, the absolute and the relative are fully manifesting together. And our problem is if we get stuck in one perspective or the other. Remember, awakening is without a fixed perspective. It can take any perspective, but it doesn't get caught in any perspective. It's free of any one perspective. So in the light, there's darkness, but don't take it as darkness. In the dark, there's light, but don't see it as light. Don't get caught. And then he says, light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot and walking. I don't think that means they're in conflict, but there's a dynamic tension in a positive, constructive way, the relative and the absolute. Just like if you're walking and you stop, there's one foot that's in front of the other. But if you walk, which is the front foot? Well, it keeps changing. There's one in the front and one in the back. It keeps moving, but it takes both to walk. The relative and the absolute. One is not the preferred one. And then continuing, each of the myriad things has its merit, expressed according to function and place. Phenomena exist. Box and lid fit. I mean, things fit together. Principle accords. Arrow points meet. That's a reference to an old image of, how rare it is for arrow points to collide in midair. They would meet. So, before we practice, I don't know about you, and I referred to it in the story, we're blissfully ignorant of the apparent tension between the absolute and the relative. But when we start to practice, that tension starts to become apparent and we feel uncomfortable and confused. It's like, this is great. I start practicing now, I feel more uncomfortable and I feel more confused. But eventually we begin to see how the two aspects are elegantly fit and work together. I was going to bring it. There's a box that I bought in Kyoto actually that has this beautiful lid, and the way that the wood is done is so seamless, and it's beautiful and natural on the outside, just natural wood. But then when you take the top off, it's all red lacquered on the inside. It's like this surprise, We begin to see deeply as we open things up. So he's getting close to the end, hearing the words, understand the meaning. And then finally, it's like a little bit of an admonition. Don't set up standards on your own if you don't understand the way right before you. How will you know the path as you walk? So we listen to the words, we attempt to understand the meaning. That's what you're practicing. And then don't set up standards on your own. It's really about how we get so trapped in our preferences about practice. There's not going to be any way for any of us to break out of our limited, relative, embodied experience in order to taste the absolute or integrate these two aspects. This is the bad news. You're not, you're not going to be able to actually break out of that. Instead, the answers are found right here in our direct dualistic experience. Because remember, relative and absolute are not two separate things. You don't have to finally get over everything. I said this in inquiry this week. Enlightenment is the negotiation of delusion. No delusion, no enlightenment. It requires you to penetrate this tension right here. Suzuki Roshi said, big mind is realizing that you'll always look through small mind. That's where we are. But then he reminds us in the next few lines, practice is not a matter of far or near, because it's all here. But if you're confused, mountains and rivers block the way. But if you're confused, a lot of things will get in the way. And I have certainly continued to practice with that in my life. And then he says, I respectfully urge you who study the mystery, do not pass your days and nights in vain. So it's a respectful, which I think is really great in England, it's very respectful. Urge you to, those of you who study the mystery, don't waste your time. In the original Chan context, the mystery, I don't know how to say the word Yun or something like that, Xuan, doesn't mean something like hidden in the ordinary sense, like a mystery, like a secret code or something. It refers to the depth of reality that can't be grasped by the conceptual mind. That's the kind of mystery, the ineffable nature of existence itself. And to study the mystery then is just simply to keep turning toward life as it is, even though you can't explain it. You just keep turning towards life as it is. This living dynamic suchness is there. So these are a few things that maybe will begin to help you begin to think about what's being taught here. It's very easy to get trapped in all the academic parts of it, and that's not very useful. That's why I started with a story about actually walking a path. And I'm going to leave you with something that may sound odd in all of this. I would imagine most everyone here has seen either recorded or videoed or even in person. You may have had the opportunity to see the Dalai Lama at some point. And have you noticed when you do so, how much he laughs? You notice that? That there's always lots of laughter, as if he cracks himself up. And if you listen, there are online, you can find some snippets of recordings of Suzuki Roshi giving these teachings on the Sandokai. And some of you may have listened to some of them. And when you do, you're going to hear him laughing all the time. These two men have suffered or did suffer immensely. They had very difficult lives, full of challenges and profound losses. So the question I leave you with is, where does the freedom come from? Why do they appear not to be burdened? How do these teachings bring joy and freedom and spaciousness? So this is to be enjoyed and not to be a burden any more than my walking to the tea house that day and getting the manuscript and bringing it back in a FedEx envelope to send it back to the United States to the publisher wasn't a task that was difficult. It was a joy. Just like my nearly 20 years with you has been a joy and continues to be. So thank you very much.
May our attention eagerly permeates every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way.
Thank you so much, Flint, for being with us and for your teachings and running through the Sandakai. And I'm sure we'll all look forward to diving a little deeper over the next few days. We shall see you on Sunday.
I wish I was there diving with you, but I'll do it on my own.
I know.